Hey guys, welcome to Man Medicine, where we talk about how men can optimize their health and escape the collapsing U.S. healthcare system. All right, guys, by popular demand, I'm going to do a video for you guys today on growth hormone, present you some of the research, and give you some of my personal takes on this kind of controversial substance. I've kind of been putting this off. I've been meaning to do a growth hormone talk for you guys for quite some time, and I've just been putting it off, but enough of you guys have asked me, and quite frankly, I get asked about GH all the time by patients. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. It's something that's it's in the forefront of the public consciousness these days, at least if you're interested in this quote, anti-aging movement that's out there. If you're involved in bodybuilding or physique sports, the subject of growth hormone comes up a lot. So what I want to do today is I want to show you what the literature shows, not what you read on the bro forums, and maybe give you guys a bit more of a nuanced knowledge base on this stuff, because there's a lot of nonsense out there about growth hormone. But this is extremely popular, I think, for a number of different reasons, not the least of which is that there's some kind of famous public figures out there that have been very open about their growth hormone use. Sylvester Stallone, for example, is like a perfect example. He has been on growth hormone and testosterone and probably a lot of other stuff, for quite some time. And, quite frankly, it shows. I mean, at the age of 70, there's a picture of him here up on the screen. The guy looks absolutely phenomenal for a 70-year-old man. He looks phenomenal for a 20-year-old man, especially by today's standards. But, he's, again, been very open about his growth hormone use. And Joe Rogan as well. He's talked openly about his testosterone use, and then he's also talked about, although to a lesser extent, his growth hormone use. And here's a guy. Both of these guys, actually. I mean, you can put pictures of them in their mid-20s, and then pictures of them currently, which I think Joe Rogan's is a few years older than me. I think he's 52. I could be off on that, and I think that Sylvester Stallone is in his early 70s at this point, maybe 71, 72. But anyway, you could put pictures of those two guys, side by side with their younger selves. And, obviously they do look older, but man, they look freaking phenomenal. So there's a lot of reasons for that, okay? And what I'm going to explain to you guys today is that, maybe growth hormone has a little bit to do with that, but probably nowhere near as much as some of the other things that these guys do, not the least of which is they train extremely diligently. They train hard. They've been at it consistently for decades. Their nutrition, I'm sure, is perfect. And quite frankly, the testosterone that they take is probably helping quite a bit too. So not to belabor that, but the point is that I get asked a lot about this. Testosterone and growth hormone seem to be like permanently linked in many people's minds, and especially in this anti-aging, I hate that term, but the anti-aging world. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, the thing about growth hormone, I'm just, you might be able to tell already, I'm not a huge growth hormone proponent. The research is not nowhere near as straightforward as it is with testosterone. It's quite clear that the benefits of testosterone replacement certainly in hypogonadal men is undeniable. The benefits of growth hormone, especially in otherwise normal men as they age, those are some murky waters, and the scientific community is very much divided on this subject, and you'll probably get an idea of why here by the end of this. So anyway, with that in mind, let's dive into this a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the legality of growth hormone prescription and kind of where we were and kind of where we are now. The golden era, the heyday of doctor, or if you walking into your doctor's office and walking out 30 minutes later with a growth hormone prescription, those days are over. That was the case in the 80s and probably well into the 90s. I remember speaking with some docs that mentored me when I was learning some of this age management stuff, and they remember those days. There wasn't a lot of scrutiny from the FDA, and they were pretty liberal with it. But those days are absolutely over at this point. So the FDA has explicitly prohibited the prescription of growth hormone for, quote, anti-aging purposes, and obviously for performance enhancing purposes as well. And they have very narrow indications for when growth hormone can be legally prescribed by physicians. And I'm talking about the United States here. It could be totally different if you're in another country, and in fact, it probably is. But clearly the FDA is okay with you prescribing growth hormone to a child who has documented growth hormone deficiency. I don't think anybody would question that those poor kids need growth hormone therapy, not only when they're children and adolescents, but it needs to be continued, well into adulthood. It's approved for HIV wasting, which is still, it still occurs, but boy, I can't remember the last person I saw with HIV wasting. These highly active antiretroviral therapies that have been out now for, over a decade have really done away with that. So I don't see HIV wasting anymore, but that is an indication for growth hormone prescriptions, at least according to the FDA. And then the other one is, documented adult onset growth hormone deficiency, and that's where they've really clamped down. You have to, and I'll show you how you make that diagnosis, but you have to unequivocally make that diagnosis in order to legally prescribe growth hormone. And they're sticklers about this kind of stuff. It's, many drugs can be prescribed off-label in the United States, but growth hormone is really not one of them. And why they've decided to focus in on growth hormone, I'm not quite sure. I mean, it's not like people are dropping dead from growth hormone. But regardless, if you're a prescribing physician, you just have to be a bit careful, and you have to, dot your I's, cross your T's, and make sure that if you're going to prescribe growth hormone to somebody, that you're doing it within the currently established FDA guidelines. Now, clearly, many physicians prescribe outside of those guidelines. I don't have access to Sylvester Stallone's medical records or Joe Rogan's for that matter, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they probably don't have genuine adult onset growth hormone deficiency, because that's actually vanishingly rare. It's out there. I have seen it. Typically in the population I've seen it in is guys who've had serious traumatic brain injuries. And I've talked about that in another video. If you guys out there, any of you veterans out there that have had TBIs, this is worth looking into, at least being tested for this, because as we'll talk about, some of the symptoms of growth hormone deficiency in the adult can be a bit non-specific, okay? Just like a lot of other hormones. So anyway, just keep that in mind. Like, if you go into a clinic and you walk out with a GH prescription for anti-aging, that doctor is taking a calculated risk in doing that for you. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not putting a judgment on it. It may be entirely appropriate for you, but for whatever reason, this is in the United States. The FDA just frown upon it, and I'm not going to get too much further into that. I don't necessarily agree with how strict they are with this stuff, but the point is, you can't just walk into a clinic and get this stuff. So what is growth hormone? It's a single chain protein, 191 amino acids long. I'm sure you really cared about that. So it's secreted from the anterior pituitary gland, which is a crucially important gland. It secretes a number of other important substances as well. The big controversy with growth hormone, in most of the studies with growth hormone, the vast majority are in animal studies. We do have, a fair amount in humans as well, but we don't have these long-term studies in humans that can really answer some of the more important questions questions that I have about growth hormone. The concerning thing about growth hormone, and so it's obviously its IGF-1 elevating properties, is that the animal studies are pretty clear. When you ramp up IGF-1, you almost in all cases, shorten lifespan for a variety of different reasons I'm not going to get into. So, there are very few longevity aging scientists out there that consider growth hormone to be a geroprotective agent, or an agent that's, has a clear signal that's going to make you live longer. The animal studies say exactly the opposite. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the case in humans, but it does raise concerns. We just need long-term studies on that. We quite frankly, we just don't know. My personal opinion is that, are you going to die early from cancer or some other, untoward side effect if you are, taking physiologically, standard physiologic doses of growth hormone, into your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s? My gut feeling is probably no, but I don't have any data to prove that, at least at this point. And it may be a very long time before we get that. What we do know, at least, for what it's worth, is that growth hormone deficient children that start therapy as children and then continue it into adulthood, as they should, as recommended by the Endocrine Society, they don't seem to be dying any sooner than their age-matched controls who don't have growth hormone issues. So, it's the waters are a bit muddy at this point when it comes to that. So, let's not get too deep into the physiology here, but I think it's kind of important just to understand that. Well, let's just say growth hormone exerts its effects through its stimulation of IGF-1 production. So, as this diagram shows here, the pituitary gland secretes growth hormone. It's stimulated by GHRH, growth hormone releasing hormone. Now, the little diagram here I notice says GnRH. That's a typo. So it's GHRH. That stimulates the pituitary gland, these somatotrophs, which is the name of the cells in the pituitary gland, to secrete growth hormone. There's another substance called somatostatin, which inhibits the release of growth hormone. So there's an accelerator and there's a brake. Growth hormone gets into the circulation, has a very short half-life. About 70% of it acts on the liver, which is the primary source of IGF-1. So most of your IGF-1 comes directly from the liver. And that can have some implications if you have chronic liver disease and issues like that. The other 30% is also converted to IGF-1, but it's done in peripheral tissues, muscle, fat, brain, heart. You can see them listed here in the kidneys as well. So this is basically how it works. It's a classic negative feedback loop, as anybody that knows anything about the hypothalamic pituitary axis, you've seen this before. So the IGF-1 is secreted by the liver and these other tissues, and then IGF-1 itself comes back up into or is detected by the hypothalamus, which in turn inhibits the release of growth hormone. So it's this kind of delicate balance. And this is what is supposed to happen when everything is working as it should. So, what are the things that stimulate growth hormone? Without getting into too many details here, low blood sugar will do it. If you have, if your hypothalamus detects that you have low amounts of free fatty acids in your blood, so it will cause lipolysis, which is one of the benefits of growth hormone. So it will raise free fatty acids in your blood through the breakdown of fat from a fat cell. It stimulates hormone-sensitive lipase, which is one of the enzymes that helps break down fat tissue. Exercise, both endurance and intense exercise, will cause a spike in growth hormone. Specifically, like the big compound lifts will do it. Like if you could do a big heavy set of squats, to failure or close to failure, you'll get a nice spike in your growth hormone. And I don't have the studies up here, but there are studies showing they've looked at leg presses versus squats. Both can be very challenging, obviously, for your legs. Squats will give you more of a growth hormone, squirt, so to speak, at the end of your workout than leg presses do. So it's like these big, heavy compound movements absolutely will cause you to spike some growth hormone. So that's a good thing. Certain amino acids, whether you ingest them in a big protein meal or whether they are taken individually or even infused in an IV, arginine is one of them, will cause a spike in growth hormone, and then sleep as well. So this is just a little diagram here, and it shows this is during the daytime. You can see these little spikes. It kind of, you have a baseline level, of course, all the time. And let's say you have a high protein meal, you'll get a little spike here. Then you go to the gym, you get another little spike. And then maybe you get tired, you take a nap, you get a little spike here. And then at nighttime, when you're in deep REM sleep, that's when you get, obviously you're fasting at night, which is another, stimulus for growth hormone secretion. You'll get higher levels in the evening. And growth hormone is, just like LH and FSH, it's secreted in like a pulsatile little fashion. It's not like a steady stream of growth hormone is like constantly exiting your pituitary gland. It's like Morse code, these little bursts throughout the day. Not surprisingly, growth hormone levels are high in children and adolescents, right? Because it's one of its major functions, actually, is the growth of long bone. So it stimulates the epiphysis, which is the growth plate, causes the bone to lengthen, hence the name growth hormone. So you can see on these charts here, like between the ages of 10 and 20, you'll probably have the highest growth hormone levels. Not probably, you will have the highest growth hormone levels that you'll have throughout your life. And then as you get older, as you move to the right here, growth hormone levels, in the 20s to 30s start to come down, and then you can see how low they get after age 40, and beyond. And that correlates almost exactly with this scatter plot here, looking at IGF-1, because you would think they go together, and they do. So you have high IGF-1 levels early in life. Once you've reached your adult height, and then you get into your 30s and 40s, you see this kind of downward trend in IGF-1, and this is normal aging. This is what is supposed to happen. Okay, what are the symptoms of growth hormone deficiency? Non-specific stuff. So I'll list these off for you. They're up on the screen, but you can imagine, like, there are a lot of different things that can cause this, and it's really tough to tease out, like, are you experiencing these symptoms just from normal aging, or is this a growth hormone issue? It's a sort of chicken and the egg thing. But increased fat mass, that one's pretty obvious. Decreased lean body mass, decreased muscle strength, decreased cardiac capacity. So that's actually a big one that that many people are not aware of. Is you can improve cardiac output if you have adult onset growth hormone deficiency. You can actually improve your cardiac performance by replacing that. So decreased bone mass, RBC volume, atherogenic lipid profile, so that's another big one. And then, thin, dry skin, impaired sweating. You guys can read the list there. It's all of these could be a thyroid issue. All of these could be, related to androgen deficiency. They could be related to cancer. It could be anything. So, it makes it tough. This is one of the challenges in endocrinology, is that many times suboptimal hormonal levels don't always present with like a classic syndrome that's like, boom, easy to recognize. Many times it's non-specific. So you kind of have to have your radar out for this sort of thing. So those are the symptoms. This is a big one here. So I talk about this all the time, right? The number one rule of man medicine is don't be fat. Okay, if you want to screw up your endocrine system, just get morbidly obese. I say that all the time, and I kind of say it jokingly, but it really is true. So many people that, even by the appropriate diagnostic testing, are found to have adult onset growth hormone deficiency, according to these tests. What they really have is obesity-related growth hormone deficiency, which is actually reversible if they lose weight. Okay, so here's a chart where they've measured intra-abdominal fat, and they've compared it to the mean 24-hour growth hormone level, and it's a clear straight shot. The more fat you're carrying, especially intra-abdominal visceral fat, the lower your growth hormone levels are. This is a study here, which confirms that. This is a 1995 study published by the Endocrine Society, and it's abdominal adiposity and physical fitness are major determinants of the age-associated decline in stimulated GH secretion in healthy adults. So, your first line treatment for growth hormone, suboptimal growth hormone levels or adult onset growth hormone deficiency, in my opinion, if you're overweight, priority one is you need to lose weight. You need to lose weight. The other thing that I'll mention in here, and I'm not going to talk about as well. So not only is increased visceral body fat associated with low growth hormone levels, but poor cardiorespiratory fitness. So they looked at, I don't have the graph here, but they looked at your patient's VO2 max. And the better your VO2 max, the more growth hormone you had. And it makes sense. If you're physically fit, and typically if you have a high VO2 max, you also have low visceral body fat. Those two tend to go together. There's probably not a one-to-one correlation. There might be some fat guys out there with VO2 maxes in the 50s and 60s, but I bet not that many. So physically fit, low body fat. Okay. I mean, if you just do those two things, so many medical problems that I see on a daily basis will just take care of themselves. All right. You don't need $10,000 a month of growth hormone. Okay. So fat is a big one. And then, as I mentioned, it's extremely important to note that if patients lose weight, they can restore normal growth hormone levels. They can restore the normal pulsatile nature of growth hormone secretion if they go ahead and lose weight. This is a study, New England Journal of Medicine, that talks about that from 2014. It's entitled Impaired Growth Hormone Response to Growth Hormone Releasing Factor in Obesity, a Pituitary Defect Reversed with Weight Reduction. So this is one of the big challenges, again, at making this diagnosis. It's like, do you genuinely have a pituitary gland problem, or is this related to obesity? Yeah, it can be tough to tease that out. Okay, I'm not going to go too deep into this one, but it's important to understand that there are other things also that influence growth hormone secretion, and specifically other steroid hormones. So estrogen stimulates the secretion of growth hormone, but it kind of blocks its activity around the liver, so there's some give and take there. Androgen, specifically testosterone, there's synergy between those two, which is probably why it's a popular combo in the bodybuilding world. So estrogen is really important, guys. This is yet another reason not to block estrogen with things like anastrozole. I'm working that into every single talk I do. I'm going to find a way to tell you not to block estrogen. This is the article here if you want to read a little bit more detail on it. It's called Sex Steroids and the GH Axis, Implications for the Management of Hypopituitarism, Best Practice and Research Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, dated 2017. So it's pretty recent article. So don't block estrogen, guys. Okay, what are the side effects of growth hormone therapy? This is a big one. So in many of the studies that I've quoted already, and some of the subsequent ones I'm going to show you, if you go into the methods and you read some of the things in there that cause patients to, there actually was like relatively high dropout rate, because a lot of people experience unwanted side effects on growth hormone therapy. Now, typically, the higher the dose, the higher the dropout rate, and the higher the side effect profile, as you would expect. I mean, that's to be expected. So, the number one complaint is soft tissue edema, according to this big meta-analysis here. It's like 50% of people will experience water retention, enough that it's like a problem for them. So they'll get swollen ankles. Carpal tunnel is a big one, and that probably has to do with water retention and swelling. Basically putting pressure on the median nerve as it passes through the carpal tunnel. It's also quite common. Arthralgia is like just nonspecific bone pain. Gynecomastia is relatively rare, but you do hear about it. Probably related to its effects on prolactin. And then, very rarely you'll have blood sugar issues, new onset diabetes. They mentioned that in one of these studies. But the big one is water retention, and followed, somewhat closely by carpal tunnel syndrome. And I have, not in any patients I've had personally, but I've had patients that I've consulted with who have been on growth hormone, and those two are like extremely common. I hear people talk about that all the time. What's not going to happen to you is you're not going to turn into Andre the Giant. Okay, here's Andre. Unless you are taking ungodly amounts of growth hormone for many, many, many years, meaning decades, you are not going to get this acromegaly type of look. And obviously, if you start it after your growth plates are closed, you're not going to get any taller. There's still people, I guess, that think growth hormone is going to make them taller. even though they're like 35 years old. It doesn't work that way. So once your growth plates are closed, you're done. This is an interesting article that delves into some of the longevity controversies in growth hormone therapy. It's called Somatotropic Signaling, Trade-Offs Between Growth, Reproductive Development, and Longevity. And again, these are reviewing animal studies. So again, it's hard to really know. The take-home message from this is that both low IGF-1 levels and high IGF-1 levels are both associated with increased mortality. Okay, so what that tells me is that there's a sweet spot somewhere in the middle where most people want to be. Okay, my take home from this is that, growth hormone probably won't prolong your life if you're taking it at physiologic, the normal doses. But it could shorten your life theoretically if you're taking like mega bodybuilding doses. Like if you're going the Liver King route and you stay on those heavy doses of growth hormone, the animal data would suggest that you're actively doing harm and you could be potentially shortening your life. The truth is we just don't know. We just don't know. But in the animal data, it's pretty clear. One of the things that I want to do today too is I want to bust like a serious myth about growth hormone. Like growth hormone, in a lot of ways, it's a victim of its name. I think if they had discovered it these days, maybe they would not have named it growth hormone. But here's the thing: everybody thinks when they get on growth hormone that they're going to get jacked, and they're going to get huge, they're going to get ripped, and their strength is going to go up, their athletic performance is going to go up. Growth hormone apparently is one of the more popular doping drugs out there because it's very difficult to detect. I think I read somewhere recently that they've come up now with a doping test that will detect exogenous growth hormone. But prior to that, a lot of high level athletes were on growth hormone and they were sailing under the radar. But here's the thing: growth hormone is not anabolic to muscle tissue, at least in any of the doses that were used in the studies that actually looked at the issue. So, maybe if you take 20 units a day, you're probably going to get some muscle hypertrophy from that. But I can't tell you for sure because nobody's ever studied that. But in the studies that look at it at physiologic doses and even just in the lower end of like super physiologic, it's not anabolic to muscle, guys. It's anabolic to connective tissue, but it's not anabolic to muscle. And I'm going to show you 3 studies in a row to drive this home. Because every time I say this, I get pushback on it, and I just want to minimize the number of comments about this that say, "Oh, you're crazy. It's totally anabolic." It is not anabolic to muscle tissue. So, study number 1. This is published in 1992, the American Physiological Society: Effective Growth Hormone and Resistance Exercise on Muscle Growth in Young Men. So they took a bunch of young guys, aged 21 to 34. Right, they had normal growth hormone and IGF-1 levels. These are like totally normal, healthy dudes. And then they put them on growth hormone and they put them on a lifting, like a pretty intense lifting program for about 12 weeks. So what did they see? Well, and this is where people get confused about this. They say, yes, they definitely showed a growth hormone-induced increase in lean body mass, whole body protein balance, and whole body protein synthesis. Well, shoot, lean body mass, right? That has to be muscle tissue. No. So lean body mass can be water. It can be connective tissue. It's anything other than fat. Just like when you hear that there are increases in fat-free mass. Well, an increase in fat-free mass is not the same thing as an increase in muscle tissue. So it can just literally just be water, and you will have an increase in fat-free mass. So don't be confused by that. I understand that it is confusing and it's a little bit deceptive. I wish I could find another term for it. But in this particular study, they found these changes in fat-free mass, lean body mass, whatever you want to call it. And there was increased protein synthesis in the muscles that they looked at, specifically the quadriceps. But these guys did not get any stronger over this 12 weeks than the placebo group. So the strength is their ability to actually perform athletically, and the amount of muscle hypertrophy that these guys experienced was identical whether they were on growth hormone or not on growth hormone. And these were young, healthy men with baseline normal growth hormone levels. Okay. Well, what about old guys, that have actual growth hormone deficiency? Well, turns out pretty much the same thing. This is a study here, effective growth hormone and resistance exercise on muscle growth and strength in older men. These men actually were growth hormone deficient. This is a study, also American Physiological Society, published in 1995. And yeah, so no big surprise, they had increased lean body mass, increased whole body protein synthesis. Sounds great, right? But they did not, it says a quote here, did not significantly amplify the effects of exercise on muscle protein synthesis or on muscle strength. And actually, these guys were on super physiologic doses of growth hormone. So they dosed it, they had it here in micrograms. They did 12.5 to 24 micrograms per kilo per day. So that basically comes out to, like, if you're at the 24 microgram dose, it's I don't know why they just do it in international units. It's 0.072 international units per kilo. So, do the math. You got a 100 kilo guy, that's 7.2 units of GH. So interestingly, they started all these guys on the high dose, but as the study went forward, they had to, because of side effects, they had to drop the dose in half in a significant number of these guys because they're having water retention and carpal tunnel syndrome, and they wanted to drop out of the study, so they instead of having them drop out, they just dropped their dose. So again, no change in muscle strength in these guys. And then finally, this one here, this is the a 1996 study from the Annals of Internal Medicine. Growth hormone replacement in healthy older men. So we had older men with GH deficiency, we had young men without GH deficiency, and now we have old men without GH deficiency. It says growth hormone replacement in healthy older men improves body composition, but not functional ability. Okay, so their dose of growth hormone was 0.09 units per kilo per day. Now here's the thing: they gave it to him 3 times a week. Kind of weird. I don't know anybody that does that. GH is typically dosed daily, and but they did this for 6 months, so that's pretty good. And here's the results that I highlighted here for you. At 6 months, lean mass had increased by 4.3% in the GH group and decreased by 0.1%, so probably not significant in the placebo group. So lean mass, again, lean mass, which is not the same thing as muscle mass necessarily. It could be, but it could also be other things. This is what's interesting, though. Fat mass decreased by an average of 13.1% in the growth hormone group and by 0.3% in placebo. So this is something that growth hormone does. I mentioned before, it activates hormone-sensitive lipase. So there does seem to be a statistically significant reduction in body fat levels as a result of, in this case, also super physiologic growth hormone levels. And then interestingly here, no statistically or clinically significant difference were seen between the groups in knee or hand grip strength or in systemic endurance. And this is another one where they had side effects. So it said dose reduction was required in 26% of the growth hormone recipients, presumably due to side effects, and in none of the placebo recipients. So, it's there are side effects to growth hormone. Absolutely. So those are the 3 studies, guys. I'm not going to hammer that home anymore. If you want to build big jack muscles, growth hormone's probably shouldn't be at the top of your list. Now, it might help you lean out a little bit, and there's nothing wrong with that. So, but just do not expect to get jacked just because you're taking even super physiologic doses of growth hormone. Okay. I talked about the indications for growth hormone. There's some other really interesting data out there that there are some other indications that maybe are not FDA approved, but I think are interesting and raise a lot of other interesting questions. And one of them is in recovery from surgery, both like major orthopedic surgery or intra-abdominal surgery. And it kind of makes sense, right? If you're going to be stimulating connective tissue growth and repair, what better time to do that than after a major surgery? And the same applies in the burn literature. People who have suffered serious burns, and I've worked in a burn unit before, and it's absolutely awful. These people are highly catabolic I mean, it's absolutely insane the amount of muscle tissue that these folks burn through. But there's good data showing that supplemental growth hormone, both after surgery and in the treatment of severe burns, like greater than 40% surface area burns, there's definitely some benefit there. So, and this is one of the studies that talks about it. And it's not even a major orthopedic surgery, but it's for ACL repair. So, use of recombinant human growth hormone to protect against muscle weakness in patients undergoing ACL reconstruction, American Journal of Sports Medicine. And average age, so these are patients aged 18 to 35. And primary outcome was knee extension strength. HGH treatment increased normalized peak isokinetic knee extension torque by 29% compared to placebo. So here's what's interesting about this. One is, any of you that have had ACL surgery, recovering quad strength is, your quad strength takes a massive hit after a surgery like this. And a huge part of your rehab is just getting back your quadricep strength. So anything you can do to help that would clearly, be of benefit. I found it interesting, though, that none of the other studies, in these other guys, like on weightlifting programs, showed strength benefits. But when you're recovering from a serious surgery like this, these guys actually did have a little bit of a strength benefit. So maybe it's, it's situation specific. And that's why I'm saying, like, the data out here is not as clear cut as I would like it to be. And just as a side note, I'm not going to talk about the growth hormone releasing peptides that are out there in this talk. I'll probably do that at another time. But this seems like a pretty reasonable indication to use some of those if you've just, if you're going in to get your ACL repaired and you want to bounce back a little bit quicker. Well, your doctor's probably not going to write you for growth hormone, but they might be a little bit more open to writing you a growth hormone secretagogue of some kind. Samorelin, ipamorelin, something along those lines that you use for a short period of time, just to help you recover. So that's an aside. I'll probably do a talk on those peptides a little bit later because I do get a lot of questions about them as well. So let's say you got a low IGF-1 or borderline low IGF-1, which, shows up periodically, but your doctor is not going to write you for growth hormone. Okay. Well, what can you do to raise your IGF-1 back up into the normal range without getting on growth hormone? Well, one of the more obvious ones, at least for those of us that have been prescribing testosterone for a long time, is simply testosterone replacement therapy. Especially, if you have low testosterone, normalizing those levels, taking additional testosterone has a pretty significant effect on IGF-1 levels, and so that may be clinically relevant. And this is a pretty cool study that shows this. Testosterone administration increases IGF-1 levels in normal men. It's a Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, another old one from 1993. And so here's the chart. So they gave guys pretty generous doses of testosterone. So they used testosterone enanthate 300 milligrams a week, well above what most people would consider to be TRT. And they actually compared it to nandrolone or DECA, also at a big dose, 300 milligrams per week. And then, in the chart here, you can see, so the testosterone group, and granted, this wasn't a huge study, but I have seen this in my clinical practice quite a bit. But so they started at 293 on average, and they went up to 354.9, so 355. So that's a pretty, over 50 point, climb, close to 60 point climb in IGF-1 with testosterone. Interestingly enough, nandrolone, you got a little bit of a bump here, but nowhere near as much as you would expect with, nowhere near as much as the guys that were just taking testosterone. And I bet you this has a little bit to do with estrogen and aromatization and the effects that we talked about earlier. So again, I've seen this many, many times. I'll have guys come in with low IGF-1, usually just below the reference range, or they're right at the very low end of normal. In the setting of a low, objectively low testosterone. And once their testosterone is corrected, that IGF level just comes right back up again. So just having a low IGF-1 is not an indication to start growth hormone therapy, despite what you might hear from certain clinics and naturopaths and things like that. Okay, you can correct this just by correcting the testosterone in many cases. Interestingly enough, correcting your thyroid, if you have low thyroid, that will also raise your IGF-1. So both T4 and T3 will raise IGF-1 levels. So that's another approach that you can take if you have an issue in that area. All right, so we talked about how the FDA mandates that you have to have adult onset growth hormone deficiency in order to be legally prescribed growth hormone in this country. So how do you make that diagnosis? Well, it's relatively straightforward, but it's kind of a pain in the ass. So there's some hoops that you have to jump through as a patient, and there's hoops that I would have to jump through for you, as a prescribing physician. So first of all, who do you test? Well, you saw the list of symptoms there. So if you have somebody that has those kind of symptoms, or if you're experiencing those symptoms, and you have an objectively low IGF-1 level, and especially if it doesn't correct on testosterone, then that's probably that to me is highly suspicious that that there could be an issue with growth hormone. The difficulty is that a normal IGF-1 level, and the Endocrine Society is very clear about this, a normal IGF-1 level does not rule out growth hormone deficiency. So you just have to kind of have your radar out for it. If you've got a low normal IGF-1 level, you get on testosterone, and perhaps you don't improve like you think you should, and maybe your IGF-1 level doesn't bump as much as you think it should, then that might be an indication to test. So how do you test? Probably the most common and probably the easiest one is to use this arginine GHRH test. So all three of these tests are stimulation tests. You give the person a substance X, and then you draw growth hormone levels, at like time zero, and then subsequently usually 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, sometimes out to 120 minutes. And you plot that out. If they have a nice, robust GH response, then you can rule out the diagnosis. If it's just sort of weak little peak and then boom down, or you don't get much of a response at all, then that's indicative of adult onset growth hormone deficiency. So GHRH, you guys may know that as Sermorelin, which is FDA approved, and it's probably the most, in terms of in mainstream medicine and endocrinology, that's where Sermorelin gets used, is to perform some of these stimulation tests. So you give a dose of Sermorelin, and then you check levels, just like I said before. This is falling out of favor. I haven't seen this actually since I was a resident, but you can do an insulin tolerance test. So you give them a nice slug of insulin. It drops your blood sugar precipitously, which is dangerous. And then you do the same thing. You look at the GH response to that insulin bolus. You got to be careful with this one. It's got to be done in a monitored setting. I would not opt to get this done if it was me, just because the risk of hypoglycemia is it's not zero. And then the other thing is you can do is a glucagon stimulation test. Glucagon also stimulates growth hormone. Typically they'll do a milligram of glucagon, which is usually pretty well tolerated. Some people get kind of nauseous with glucagon. I use high levels of glucagon or higher doses of glucagon in the emergency room in certain scenarios, and people invariably barf when I give it to them. But anyway, all three of those, Sermorelin, insulin, and glucagon can be used to do some of these stimulation tests and, and get you the diagnosis. But in order for your doctor to legally prescribe growth hormone in the United States, you have to have, or they have to do one of these tests and document an abnormal finding on it. Otherwise, it's, they may still prescribe it, but, they're taking a little bit of a risk, perhaps with their license. Okay. So what are the benefits? Let's say you have genuine adult onset growth hormone deficiency, which again is pretty damn rare. We talked about the decrease in fat mass. If you have growth hormone deficiency, guys with growth hormone deficiency tend to have obesity issues, specifically in terms of visceral body fat. So, growth hormone can definitely help with that. If you look at just overall quality of life, and there's a bunch of different scoring systems out there that sort of measure global quality of life, it does seem to help. A lot of people just feel better on growth hormone. They have more energy, more pep in their step. There's a lot of non-specific, just beneficial feelings that people get when they're on growth hormone. So patients, as long as the dose is reasonable and they're not having the side effects we talked about, they tend to like it. What I'm interested in is particularly the cardiovascular risk factor reduction. So people with growth hormone deficiency, they many times will have unfavorable lipids. So high LDLs, high ApoB, that sort of thing. And correcting growth hormone deficiency tends to improve their cardiovascular status, at least in terms of their lipids. If you look at CRP levels, which is a measure of systemic inflammation, we know that chronic inflammation, is one of the culprits in atherosclerotic disease. CRPs tend to go down with growth hormone therapy. And I mentioned earlier about cardiac function. So, when you treat a deficient individual with growth hormone, you will see improvements in stroke volume, which correlates with improved cardiac output, and so you might see improved exercise capacity. Maybe grandpa couldn't go up the stairs without stopping halfway. Now grandpa's making it 3/4 of the way up the stairs, or he's getting to the top. Now that he's on growth hormone. So anyway, there are benefits to growth hormone if you have a clear deficiency. What we don't know for sure is, again, the long-term, effects on lifespan, and cancer and things like that. There's, if you have an active cancer or a history of cancer, growth hormone is absolutely contraindicated according to all the guidelines that are out there, because there's concern that IGF-1 will drive cancer cell growth, and there's good animal data to suggest that that's true. So what's my overall feeling on growth hormone? Honestly, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. Growth hormone is incredibly expensive, at least if you're in the United States. It can run you sometimes up to $8,000 to $10,000 a month. So if you're otherwise healthy, if you don't have adult onset growth hormone deficiency, which again very very few people do, I just don't think it's worth it. I think you're much better off putting your time and effort into focusing on your nutrition, your training, and then optimizing your testosterone levels. You'll get far more out of that than you will from the addition of growth hormone into your regimen. If you want to try it out, obviously it's entirely up to you guys. I personally don't recommend it unless you have a clear indication for it. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. I hope you found that useful. If you have experience with growth hormone that you'd like to share, I would love to hear it. And I will catch you guys next time. All Man Medicine video and audio has been created and shared online for informational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute the practice of medicine or professional healthcare services of any kind, including the giving of medical advice. I am not your doctor. No doctor-patient relationship has been established. This content is not meant to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied upon solely for that purpose either. The only purpose of this content is to present peer-reviewed, research-backed health information for your consideration. As always, rely on the advice and guidance of your personal physician before undertaking any activity presented here, and if in doubt or not comfortable with said activity, practice discretion. Your health is your responsibility and not ours. Finally, I take conflicts of interest seriously. I accept no compensation whatsoever from any private corporations, including pharmaceutical or supplement companies. You can trust that if I recommend a medication, product, or service, it's because I genuinely believe in it and not because I'm being paid to endorse it.